You know, it seems as soon as the Super Bowl ends, everything in the NFL turns towards the draft. It's draft crazy central. Everything's draft, mock draft, draft. Who's the best prospects? Well, we have some crazy stories connected with the NFL draft, and they're coming up for you in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com, and welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And as we get into the middle of April here, you can barely go as a football fan online and look up anything with the referring to the NFL or college football and not see the word mock draft or NFL draft. Well, it's happening everywhere, and it just makes it for a crazy place on the internet with all these predictions and all the experts telling you who your team's going to pick and who's going to be number one and yada, yada, yada. It's a fun time, but it's a confusing time, and it's a crazy time. Yeah, the draft is a crazy time. Well, I had done some reading recently, some things that were not in the mock draft, and found some crazy instances of actual draft day and draft-related stories that I thought were kind of interesting to share. And the first one starts off with the very first draft, 1933. And if you remember, we talked to Upton Bell, and his father, Bert Bell, was the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles at the time. He wasn't the commissioner yet. Well, he and a bunch of other teams that were small, you know, the Steelers and Green Bay Packers and the Eagles, well, they were trying to get the league to go to a draft, which no other sport had at the time, by the way, because there was domination by the larger market teams, you know, the Chicago Bears and the New York Giants and the Chicago Cardinals. Those teams were just dominating everything. So, and getting any players that they wanted for the right price. So they wanted to have a little bit of parity is what they asked for. So finally, 1933, the NFL draft comes, and the Eagles and Bert Bell had the very first pick. Well, they knew who their man was. Jay Berwanger. You know, he is the first Heisman Trophy winner. And, you know, he actually ended up being the first player taken in the NFL draft. Well, Berwanger didn't really know if he wanted to play football or not. But the Eagles looked at him and said, hey, this is the best college player in the game. You know, he won the Heisman Trophy. And Berwanger even talked about it later in a quote. He said, quote, I graduated with a degree in business and went to work for a rubber company. I wrote a column for the Daily News that first year, too, he said in a Chicago Tribune article. He went on to say, I didn't play pro because they weren't paying much money. I didn't get hit making speeches at high schools and Kiwanis clubs, but I got indigestion from corned beef and mashed potato dinners, unquote. Yeah, Berwanger ended up turning down the Eagles and their fee that they wanted to pay him, their salary. You know, the going rate for a number one pick, I guess, or a top pick was about $50 a game. Berwanger, he countered back. He said he wanted $1,000 per game, and it was just too much for the Eagles to do. So Berwanger did not play ever in the NFL, and he was the first draft pick in the National Football League. You know, it's an amazing stat. There are only 31 of the 81 players selected in that first NFL draft actually ever played in the National Football League. Crazy case indeed. But we got a couple cases of mistaken identity stories that happened. And one happened to the Cleveland Browns, the old Cleveland Browns, when Art Modell owned them. And they went to draft a person in the 1979 draft. They wanted a cornerback, Lawrence Johnson from Wisconsin. He was one of the fastest guys around. He was just running off the tape. You know, stopwatches were clocking him at unheard of speeds. So, as tradition at the Browns, the first pick was official. A Browns assistant would put the player on the phone with Art Modell, the team owner. Well, it was relayed that the story happened that Art Modell got on the phone and said, something to the effect, "Hey, Lawrence, this is Art Modell. Welcome to Cleveland. You're our second round selection for this 1979 NFL draft." And the youngster was excited. Lawrence says, "Hey, gosh, I can't believe it. All the experts were saying I wouldn't even get drafted, or at least wouldn't get drafted in the second round. This is amazing." And he said, Modell answered back and said, "Yeah, we were so excited to have a player of your size and speed to help us out here." Kept referring to the speed the man had. And Lawrence turned brown and said, Johnson goes, "Wow," he goes, I thought I didn't think I was fast, but I guess I'm pretty fast for my size and my weight." And Modell started turning around and said, "Well, what do you mean? How much do you weigh?" And he said, I weigh 290 pounds. Modell about fell off his chair, and he looked over and he goes, looking around the room, he says, "We drafted a cornerback that weighs 290 pounds. Well, here they had got the wrong Lawrence Johnson, and they ended up drafting the correct guy, but whoever got Lawrence Johnson on the phone, who was a defensive lineman for another team from Wyoming, he got the wrong guy on the phone and had the conversation. And that Lawrence never did get into the NFL, but Lawrence Johnson, the cornerback, did end up being the draft pick of the Cleveland Browns that year. Well, we had another case in Detroit in 2005. Alex Smith was supposed to go and do a visit with the Detroit Lions. Steve Mariucci was the coach at the time, and they wanted to take a look at a tight end whose name was also Alex Smith, Alexander Smith. And he was one of the 30 visits the Lions were allowed to have. And so they made arrangements, and then Mariucci goes out on the field to see the young prospect come in, and here it's Alex Smith, the quarterback. And he said, "Hey, what are you doing here? We wanted to have the tight end come in." And they got a good chuckle out and everything. And, of course, Alex Smith was the quarterback, but ended up being drafted number 1 by the San Francisco 49ers. He played at Utah. I'm not sure if they ever did get a chance to take a look at that tight end, Alexander Smith, and I'm not sure what his status was, but still an interesting story of mistaken identity. And speaking of that mistaken identity, how about an embarrassing moment for a big-time NFL name? The 1977 NFL draft, there was a young safety coming out of the University of Minnesota named Tony Dungy. Yeah, that guy, the guy that was the Super Bowl winning coach, was coach of the Buccaneers and with the Indianapolis Colts, where he won a Super Bowl with Peyton Manning. Well, he was watching the draft, and the draft wasn't as big of a deal back in the 1970s as it is today, and he was trying to follow it, and he never got a phone call the day of the draft, so he got a little bit anxious. He ended up calling the Associated Press to see if he had been drafted. He asked them, "Hey, has Tony Dungy been drafted?" And they said, "Well, sorry, you haven't been drafted." So quite a bit of disappointment from the youngster and everything. But all was good, because just a little bit later, the Pittsburgh Steelers called him and picked him up as an undrafted free agent. And he ended up playing on a couple Super Bowl teams there with the Steelers in the late 70s. So that's kind of an interesting one. Another great story comes from the Washington Redskins. Well, they used their 9th overall pick on a guy by the name of Rossi, Calvin Cal Rossi, and ended up picking him only to find out that in 1946 he was not eligible because he was only a junior. Whoop, big gaffe there. So the following year, they still liked him a lot, and they ended up picking him in the first round of the 1947 NFL draft. And so they really wanted their man. They went after him twice, drafted the same guy twice in consecutive years. But the real kicker on this one is, after being selected the second time, Rossi told them that he had no plans to play in the NFL, and he never played one single snap for the Washington Redskins, who picked him twice in consecutive NFL drafts. Now, those are just some crazy stories that we've had from NFL history. and especially draft-related ones. And there's a plethora more, but just I wanted to give you a little bit of that to give you some enlightenment, a little bit of a chuckle, and make you wonder things that go on in the draft room. And there's plenty more stories there. There's even a couple cases in the Canadian Football League draft, of nothing to do with the NFL, where unfortunately they didn't do their homework and they had drafted individuals that had passed away before the draft. It happened on 2 different occasions in the Canadian Football League. And one was not so long ago. Within the last 30 years, there was one of those gaffes. So these guys really got to do their homework because there's big money on the line and a lot of people watching high-profile picks. National Football League. Enjoy the draft in a couple weeks. Hope your team gets the guy that they need to put them over the top. Till tomorrow, everybody, have a great Gridiron Day. We're taking a peek over at the chains and the down marker. It's 4th and long. We're going to have to punt the ball and get on out of here, but we'll have another series tomorrow for your football history headlines, so be sure to tune in. We invite you to check out our website, PigskinDispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. PigskinDispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast. PigskinDispatch.com is a proud affiliate of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.
Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandom at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.